open. We're now streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So if you're on those platforms, feel free to ask your questions and we'll monitor those as well. Um, it's now 11:57, so we have 3 minutes till the start of the program. I see some people starting to filter in on Zoom. And as a reminder, just so you know, all questions should be directed in the Q&A box. And if you would like to ask your question in person, please raise your hand and we'll see if we can activate your microphone. We have an hour total today, but of that, we probably have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So if you ask your questions early, it's much more likely to be answered by our panelists. We have two panelists today. Looking at the architecture and design of wineries in the Napa Valley and beyond. And we're looking forward to your questions. As a reminder, there are some winery related items on our auction this year. You can visit californiapreservation.org/bid, BID, to see some of these items and bid on them until December the 19th, at which point at 8 p.m. the auction will close. So we encourage you to support CPF through bidding. We also encourage you to consider donating to the California Preservation Foundation by visiting californiapreservation.org/give this year. Your tax-deductible donation will help support historic preservation efforts in the state as well as art education efforts and free programming. We look forward to your questions today, and we'll see you in about 2 minutes. As a reminder, today's program can also be closed captioned. If you see a show captions button on your screen, you can always click that to show it, or you can also hide it by clicking the same button. You also, if you would like to opt out of chat updates, you can uncheck the show chat previews button on the bottom of your screen. That way, you won't see any chat updates while the presenters are speaking. But we do encourage you to actively engage and participate, and feel free to use the chat box when you'd like. I just enabled it for all people. So welcome to today's program. We'll start here in 1 minute. Welcome to today's program. My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. Today's program is on the architecture and design of wineries. Part one was on food, and if you missed it, you can visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/CAL preservation to view any past programming as well as today's recording. Wanted to remind everybody to be actively involved in the question and answer. You can do that by clicking on the Q&A button. I'm going to enable the ability to upvote and comment on questions. If you'd like to do so, you can do that. Today's program is part of a 3-part series. The next part is on December the 12th, and that is on miniatures, which we have one guest from the National Museum of Miniatures, and that should be a lot of fun as well. So we hope you'll join us for that. But today's program, as I mentioned, is on the architecture and design of wine. We have two guests. We have Heather Hebert and Naomi Marolio. Next to me here is my colleague, Lisa Versace, and the two of us will be moderating questions. So again, please ask your questions early. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Naomi Marolio, who will first show us some exemplary wine related projects that she's worked on in the past. So welcome, Naomi, and thank you for joining us today.
Right, right. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to start this off by focusing on historic winery structures. I'm very excited to do that. It's a building type that's near and dear to my heart. And before I get started, I better make sure. Can everyone see the screen? Is my PowerPoint showing? I
Not
hope
yet.
it's showing on mine. Still no?
Not yet.
Okay. And we practiced and everything. How about now? Nope. Ugh. Okay, bear with me just a second. We just had this working, right? If there's any advice?
I have your slides on my screen, Naomi, so maybe I can pull those up, and then we could do that. I can share on my end.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll just give you a next. Sorry
Sure.
about that.
Not a worry. Let me get this queued up here. Okay, here we go. Okay, do you see it?
Yes. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so we'll start off with the history and these wine structures. Take a little time to look at what makes them unique, a little bit of history, the ups and downs of the industry that impacted these buildings, and then navigating, just really briefly, navigating the challenges involved in rehabilitation and adaptive reuse, spending quite a bit of time on seismic strengthening, since that is really significant in rehabilitating these buildings. Next. So people are quite familiar with the Napa Valley wines, maybe not as familiar with the tremendous stock of historic buildings from the early wine industry, so the late 1800s. Some say, or at least one author who's quoted here, that it's really the finest collection of truly great winery buildings in the world. And I don't disagree. Next. So they were built and constructed specifically for the purpose of producing wine. And so many of these buildings, even though they might look a little bit different, share common characteristics that really created a distinct building type. And so what they share, at least these are locally constructed of locally quarried stone. Napa and Sonoma counties have an amazing stone type of volcanic tufa that was really long lasting and great quality stone. Next. So these buildings are typically, the historic ones are built against hillsides. Here at Behringer, right up against the hill here. Next is Greystone, also what kind of the granddaddy of them all, and one of the latest wineries constructed during this period up against the hillside. And this made it possible to employ a gravity feed winemaking process. And so next. So the roadways up behind the buildings were how the grapes were brought into the building at the top floor, usually a 2 to 3 story structure. Grapes are crushed. Naturally, the juice drains down to the next floor where it's fermented and then barreled and stored and bottled on the ground floor, then easy transport out. So this is, to the left here is the Greystone Winery, and to the right is similar, the Buena Vista Winery. So next. So setting them up against the hillside also allows for these excavated caves, which had great temperature and humidity for aging wine. Next. And then last but not least, one of the other character defining features of the building type are heavy timber framing system to support all those heavy loads. Usually a 2 to 3 bay system is what we found in most of these winery buildings. Next. So this is, the heyday was from the, in the late 1800s, from the 1870 to 1890. They had a terrible phylloxera epidemic that it was a bug that ate away at the vines. Really catastrophic for the industry in the 1890s, followed shortly by both Prohibition and the Great Depression. And so many of the winery buildings were abandoned during that period, even though some survived with sacramental wine production. Yes. But then for all of us who have enjoyed the movie Bottleshock, we understand and know that this all changed in the mid 1970s. Up until the 70s, it was a very sleepy valley. So Judgment of Paris occurred. Napa Valley wines beat out the French wines in blind tasting and rocked the industry. And so this really spawned some significant changes and pressure for growth. Next. So many of the wineries that were still in business, they built new production facilities for increase their production, and really abandoned the historic buildings. The image on the left is at Krug Winery. This was in the early 2000s. These enormous redwood tanks are completely empty. The building was abandoned, but the tanks were still there because the winemaking process also changed. Smaller tanks, different materials, and so these were obsolete. But there was great interest in these abandoned buildings, and the owners really were searching for ways to rehabilitate and reuse the existing winery buildings. Next. And they were envisioning, retail, hospitality, and then in some cases, reintroducing winemaking into the buildings. And the challenges, there were, a number of challenges, primarily bringing these buildings up to seismic code. They're large buildings, unreinforced masonry. And so as we kind of embarked working with the different building owners, that became the biggest challenge. And so we worked together with some great engineers on these projects and great contractors, just to try and save as much of these character defining features and materials as possible. But as we started getting into some of these projects, yes, thanks. We kind of stumbled on all of the previous attempts at seismic strengthening. So there was a whole evolution. We became interested in how this, the approach was evolving. The very earliest that we came across was at the Charles Krug Winery. And here you can see, this is a historic photo with a plaster finish. This was a stone building, but had a plaster finish with painted lines to resemble stone. And then next. And way back in the 1940s, they had sprayed gunite over the plaster surfaces as kind of an attempt to hold the stone together. And then this was kind of an era where we found a lot, and you can go to the next one, what we call like replacement systems. No one trusted the stone, no one trusted the heavy timber framing. This is a building at the winery, Charles Krug Winery, where the interior system was completely replaced with concrete, both concrete columns and floors. Next. Beringer Winery went through an upgrade cycle in the 1970s, and this was before there was a state historic building code. So engineers were really, again, working with replacing or completely subsidizing the strength of the masonry. At Beringer, they used a gunite system on all of the interior walls. Next. And you can see a little bit on here that see the concrete surfaces on the walls, and then they completely replaced the heavy timber framing with this steel column and support system for the floor. And then most of the caves, these gorgeous caves, were also strengthened with gunite sprayed on the surface of the stone. So this was kind of the 1970s. So when we started working on those structures, most of the original materials were already gone or obscured. In the 1980s, this is at the Buena Vista site, the press house. There was an advancement, and these stone walls were preserved in the previous scheme. They were injected with an injection grout and pinned, but you can see all of the plates that are on this exterior surface. And if you go to the next slide, those are the interior was replaced, but the new structural system of the columns and the beams were stitched together to the stone wall. And that's what those exposed plates on the exterior were part of that connection. But still, the masonry surfaces were preserved here, and so that was an advancement, we felt. Next. So when we were working on the Chateau Montelena, this is ZFA were the structural engineers on this project, with a greater understanding of how to test the actual value of the stone walls. We did shear testing program here. The walls were strong enough to stay without any reinforcement, completely preserved. And the only structural upgrade to the original system next was with the on the heavy timber framing. And so we were able to retain the system, but we did have to reinforce the individual elements. And so that's on the next slide. By putting a plate, bolting a plate, so all of the individual timber members could act as a single element. So enhancing these original features. So then this next project is Buena Vista Winery. And in this project, we were given the charge. It was originally constructed. There were two buildings. The building in the front is the press house that we just looked at with all of the plates on the exterior. The property was purchased in 2011. The new owner wanted to rehabilitate the larger cellar building in the back of the photo. And the charge here was to do something completely invisible, so that completely different than what was done on the press house. So do a structural strengthening scheme that no one would be able to see. So that was a challenge that we faced. The cycle of this building reflected kind of the highs and lows of the industry that I've already mentioned. This is an image from the 1940s. Next, we assume it was 1906 earthquake damage that the building experienced here at the corner, and one of the caves collapsed. This building had 3 caves. This one, only one collapsed. Next. So this was the building in 2011. It was closed to the public after the 1989 earthquake. And so for 20 odd years, in very, very bad shape, the significant masonry cracking. The walls, actually, we did some of the same shear testing as was done on Chateau Montelena, and in some cases, the values came out at 0. So we didn't have that advantage. Next. Just some more examples of the significance of the cracking. And so this building, so we could move forward with a completely invisible scheme. The engineers, this was NKM engineers, they proposed a center core installation. And this was actually in Sonoma County. And was very, it kind of blew the minds of the building reviewers. So we had quite a bit of back and forth to justify the strength of the system. But this is one of the cores being installed from the top of the roof on all of the walls. And the center core strengthening scheme worked together with masonry repair and repointing, which was quite extensive, as you can see. This was a very soft stone. It wasn't Napa Sonoma Valley's best, but yes. So this is the repair and repointing in progress. So solidifying all of the masonry walls, and we moved on to the post and beam upgrades. This particular owner didn't like the scheme that was used at Chateau Montelena, thinking it was too visible. So next, we worked with the engineers on a concealed system where we used Dutchman repairs for all of the deteriorated wood, and some exposed bolting, and then some concealed anchorage as well. Next. So this is the finished product. You can see exposed bolting in the joists or the girders, and then the small plugs concealed the anchorage that was recessed into these. So no visible, other than the bolt heads, no visible strengthening, all concealed. And then one of the greatest challenges were the existing caves. These are rare examples where they are still exposed stone. You can see the texture of the pick marks from when they were excavated. And so we worked with a cave engineer, Condor Engineering, and they came up with a approach that the county approved, which was both monitoring and strengthening. So they're supposed to come in every year and monitor whether there's any movement of the stone surfaces. And then next, we went in with rock anchors, and in the next slide, with micro anchors for some of the cracking, and then patched all those holes. So in the end, so it's kind of a again, and in the evolution of the structural strengthening systems, getting to one that was completely invisible, so that all of the features of the original building was something that we were very proud of. Next. We can go through these. So these are just, they did reintroduce winemaking into the building. And also all of these exposed surfaces were retained. And next, the caves for, are now aging wine as the originally done. And just very quickly, it was a process with the county to get them to accept this strengthening method. Very shortly after it was completed, the South Napa earthquake occurred. Next. And Buena Vista, compared with some of the other projects that we had upgraded as the crow flies, was very close to this epicenter. And so we kind of had live action and could see how the scheme worked. And so we were very pleased. There was some minor cracking, I think is on the next slide, but performed very, very well. And I think it was good timing that we were able to strengthen this building the shape that it was in, it may not have survived as well. So that just kind of gives you an overview of dealing with the historic buildings and some of the challenges in reusing them. And now I'm going to turn it over to Heather to talk about new wineries.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Hebert, and a couple years ago, I came out with a book, my first book called The New Architecture of Wine, and I'm going to share some of my insights from that journey here. And I'm going to share my screen and cross my fingers that everyone can see it. Looks like everyone can. We're taking a little shift here from Naomi's presentation and talking about the current architectural landscape of wine, and or current as of 2019. There are, when my book was released, there are so many wonderful wineries I wasn't able to include. So I'm working on a follow-up to that book, which will be great. I decided to write this book because I had been fascinated about winery architecture since ever since I could remember. I've been in architecture all my life. My father founded a firm in San Francisco. I worked for his firm for 25 years, and then left to start writing and consulting. In my early 20s, I visited a winery called Lambert Bridge. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with it. It's kind of iconic in the wine country. And what I saw was a lovely barn filled with barrels where we tasted on a board, slapped on top of wine barrels, but there were chandeliers hanging amidst the wine barrels. And it was a beautiful, beautiful barn, and I just looked around me and I thought, someday I'm going to write a book about winery architecture, which I then did several decades later. The winery that you're looking at right now is on your screen is by a husband and wife team called Nielsen Shoe. And the reason I start with this, and this is actually on the opening pages of the book, is that they were sort of instrumental to my mind in bringing a language of winery architecture to the California wine country that was somewhat different. As Naomi mentioned, it was, I think 40 some odd years ago now that the Judgment of Paris put California wine on the international stage. For a number of decades after that, a lot of winery architecture was largely referential, looking to European models, and other areas of the world for inspiration, for architectural inspiration. Starting about 20, 25 years ago, that started to change, just like the California winemakers had a confidence in their winemaking. So the architectural expression did the same. And I love this quote. It likens winemaking to connecting the human soul to the soul of a place by rendering its grapes into liquid music. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with the quote about architecture being frozen music. And I thought I loved that. This is Stryker Sonoma, which is now Foley Sonoma, purchased by Bill Foley some time ago. This was Nielsen Shoe's foray into architecture design. It was designed and built in 2002, and is largely viewed as being one of the first sort of very original expressions of what the California winemaking landscape wanted to say. I think the reason that winery architecture is so fascinating is that it's really unlike any other any other commercial architecture that I've ever found in my career, in that it really embodies a passion and storytelling that is really quite different and very personal, more personal than anything really other than residential design in my mind. It's probably why so many winery architects toggle back and forth between winery design and custom residential design. It makes a great deal of sense. And it is really telling the story of the land, and kind of like winemaking, the architecture is really there to say what the land wants to say. In my journey of exploring California winery architecture, I spent about 1.5 years in researching and writing the book. I came up with really 5, but I'm going to focus on 3 here, sort of approaches. One I called the New Agrarian, and it was contemporary renditions of the region's agricultural vernacular, really made, epitomized by the architecture of Howard Bakken, and then interpreted again and again and again by different architects along the line. The second was thoroughly contemporary responses to the land, and I called this section "Grasses and Oaks, Glass and Steel," because it was taking contemporary materials, contemporary architectural expressions, and using them to convey what the land wanted to say in a very different way. And then the third circles back to what Naomi was talking about, and taking historic structures, some of them the ghost wineries, the so-called ghost wineries that were abandoned during that sort of triple threat of phylloxera, prohibition, and the Depression, and re-envisioning them, often sometimes inserting production within them, but often taking those original wineries and reimagining them for hospitality use. And then while production is moved to a more contemporary structure, at a close distance away, and creating sort of an interesting dynamic tension in terms of design in that sense. Winery architecture really combines, it's agricultural, it's industrial, it's art, and it's increasingly hospitality over the last 25 years. And hospitality is a very large component. And it works really well within that section of that re-envisioning historic structures. So the new agrarian was the first section. And I thought what would be fun to do is I just pulled out some examples. There are many more than this, but some examples from this section to talk about. The first project I wanted to touch on is Ramsgate. It is literally the gateway to the wine country. It's in the Carneros region. It is designed by Howard Bakken's firm, and it was envisioned as Carneros means rams, and gate is obviously the gateway to the winery. Thus the name of the winery. This was really inspired by traditional European winery architecture, in which it was really an agrarian building. All the winemaking took place in the courtyard. You can see the courtyard is at the center here. Architect Luca Pinata, who was a principal with Howard Bakken at the time, Bakken and Gillum at the time, was the lead designer on this on this building. And what you're looking at is the production winery. This does include much of the production here, not all of it, but some. And then behind you in this main view is the primary tasting rooms, which you can see along the bottom of your screen. And it's really a European approach in which it knits together the production and welcoming hospitality, agriculture. I mean, they're, and everything all together in one place, in a very sort of rustic but perfect setting. The gray stain, if you approach this from the south, coming from the Bay Area, you it is very subtle. It really completes the hillside and purposefully does not call attention to itself until you are in this amazing courtyard. And it leads off the book with good reason. The second example of this architectural approach is Davis Estates. And this is an amazing property that came very close to being burned, but was thankfully saved from the fires. And it is also by Howard Backen's firm. The lead architect on this was John Taft. And it was inspired by a barn that you don't see here, but it is on the right is a historic barn. To the left of this hospitality building is the production facility. And this too, as Naomi mentioned, is backed up against the hillside. The wine caves are directly underneath. And it is meant as a showcase for winemaking, for wine hospitality. It is very residential. As you go in, if you can see along the bottom, there's an ingle nook. There's a kitchen that looks like a supersized residential kitchen. And there is a panoramic view, which you can see in the lower right, from the huge porch out front. It is also sort of, this to my mind is epitomized another thing that architect Howard Backen did for winery architecture is to, how do I say this, become integrally involved in the design with the owners and really sort of convey their personality in the winery, and then become friends, lifelong friends. And this Mike Davis is bigger than life, and everything in this winery is bigger than life. His opinion is touched everywhere in this winery, and when you meet him, you look around and he can point to every detail and explain why it's there. And it's really fabulous, and it's really part of what the wine industry has become is, and why people visit wineries, is not only to taste wine or to see the view, but to be part of the story. And that is epitomized in this winery. The next is McCrosty. And I love this. This is a contemporary, very lighthearted Scandinavian touch on agrarian architecture. It was designed by Douglas Thornley while at Gould Evans. It is light, bright, welcoming, and I called this chapter in the book a house for Steve, because it really was designed as a house for Steve McCrosty. And I think what you're seeing in this presentation is a through line of these are equally welcoming, sort of not residential projects per se, but with a very residential feel. And the whole point is to build a sense of connection and community. And so across this, what you're looking at here, just one last point on this, is that you're looking at the hospitality building, which is a through view of this amazing site, excuse me, in Healdsburg. If you look at the lower second from the left image, you will see directly across the courtyard is production facility. So again, they're mirrored across from each other, which is another very common tool or approach. The last of this section on the New Agrarian is Milka Estates, located just down the road from Davis Estates, actually on Silverado Trail. It is a thoroughly contemporary rendition by Juan Carlos Fernandez of Signum Architecture of the agricultural vernacular. It's composed solely of two small prefab buildings, painted a dark charcoal gray, very subtle. It was a small budget, small winery. It's Cherie and Philippe Melka's personal winery. Philippe Melka is very well known for making, for his Atelier Melka, making some of the best cabs arguably throughout the Napa Valley. And this is very much derived from the agricultural vernacular, and yet thoroughly modern. And this is sort of a perfect transition to the next section, which I called Grasses and Oaks, Glass and Steel. And this is another Nielsen shoe project, one of my favorites, actually. And this is a production facility for Occidental Winery. It's Steve Kitzler's winery in out on the coast with his daughters. And it is probably one of the most thorough, how do I say this? One of the most pure expressions of a winemaker's personality in architecture that I've ever seen. A restrained, pure, close to the land, minimal intervention, just like Steve Kitzler. They nailed it. I'll get back to them because that was the opening picture, but this is Cage Estate, also designed by Juan Carlos Fernandez of Signum Architecture. And this, another very important aspect is of winery architecture is sustainability. And this was one of the first two LEED certified wineries constructed in the Napa Valley. The first was Hall, also designed by Signum Architecture by Juan Carlos's partner, Jared Denton. And it is, again, as you can see in these pictures, thoroughly contemporary. Yet it's a very honest, authentic reaction to the land. If you look closely, there's a lot of vertical elements. Those are response to the trees. The dual buildings, the smaller, what Juan Carlos calls the little sister hospitality building, is what you see in the larger photo. The larger, more masculine brother building is you can see below in the background, and then in the close-ups, that's the production facility. And this interesting combination of sustainable approach to design in everything that he did, which was a mandate by the partners in the owners, and then this sort of very strong, what he called a masculine response to the strength of the vineyards and the wines on Howell Mountain, where this is located, is in direct contrast. I don't have photographs of it here, to Odette Winery, which he designed a short time later, which has a very sort of feminine quality to it with its curves and different approach to the design. This is another of my favorites from the book, Progeny Winery, also designed by Juan Carlos Fernandez, and it literally alights on the hillside. Again, a thoroughly contemporary response, but one that is absolutely rooted in the story of its owners and the story of the land and place. They are, again, dual buildings. This is the hospitality building. He designed a production building just out of the screen on the top to your right, that was again comprised of prefabricated buildings, carefully put together with screens and a throughway that render it very very beautiful, but very simple. And this is meant to be an expression of the owners, husband, wife, and the land, where it's completing. As you can see, there's a dip in the curve here, and of the ridge line, it completes that curve. It does not rise above it, and then expressing the land in numerous ways. It's got so many, I can't even describe them here, but they're these monumental sort of concrete exoskeletons that you can see on the bottom, built to age quickly, more quickly than the little glass gems of buildings that are placed within them. And then the buildings are off kilter underneath the floating roof lines, and one facing the vineyards in one way, and one facing the mountaintop in another, creating this very interesting dynamic relationship to the land. And yet they're very, very transparent, very immersive. And that really is the through line between the agricultural approach, this very contemporary approach, and then the historic approach is that the immersive experience of the land and the winemaking experience. And this just epitomizes it for me. Occidental Winery. This is what you saw at the beginning. This is by Nielsen Shoe. Absolutely beautiful, pure rendition. You can see the production building in the lower right on the big picture. Pure rendition of Steve Kistler's approach to winemaking, and a thoroughly transparent experience of the surrounding vineyards out on the Sonoma coast. Unbelievable. If you haven't been there, go there. Another one. This was on the cover. This is Quintessa Pavilions, and I'm probably running a little behind, so I'm going to do it quickly. These three small pavilions were added to the Quintessa Winery, and they basically render in architecture, very subtle, very lean, spare architecture. The founder, Augustin Hneus, walk along the ridge line where he used to take people to show them his amazing lands in the Napa Valley. Next, that brings me to the last few minutes on history re-envisioned. And the first of these is Donna Estate. This was one of the ghost wineries. This is one of those stone structures that Naomi was talking about. This is by Howard Backen and again by John Taft. And the owners tell me that they chose Howard Backen after an extensive interview process because he was the only architect that wanted to save these walls and use them in a different way. And the way that they're used is as an entry courtyard, very European approach, beautiful approach to the wine tasting experience. And then the new production facilities are located in the wood structures behind. And the reinforcement is really interesting here. That trellis is instrumental in all those in stabilizing the stone walls, and the stone walls of that courtyard by being left untopped could be stitched together on the top with cores down through them, so that, and then trenches dug below, so that they did not, it could be a very subtle reinforcement. But there are those plates that you see here that Naomi referenced there on the lower right, and those were cast to match plates found on the site. This is Epic Winery, an amazing experience. This is the former York Mountain Winery, the first winery in Paso Robles. And this was an project undertaken by Lake Flato. Brian Corte was a partner in charge at the time. He is now with Clayton Corte Architects. This is an amazing feat of engineering and of a passion and love for this. The owners were so devoted. They took, if you see the brick facade on the front there, every stone, and on the lower right, the stone walls on the interior, every stone was taken down, cataloged individually, and then reinforced and reassembled, and then left rough, and then finished in with concrete to show the history. And then a thoroughly contemporary structure was added within it. And if you look down on the lower buildings, you can see what Naomi was talking about. This is backed up against a hillside. They saved the original press, and it's obviously used for show at this point, but you can see where the wine usually formerly came down through gravity feed, and was this press was originally on the lower floor, obviously, but this is where it came down, and there was actually a railway that fed the grapes into the winery. The production facility is a short distance away in another beautiful contemporary building, which I didn't show here. Kistler, this is Naomi worked on this project. It was the first winery that I visited, and I remember distinctly one of the most arresting things in this new barn was the wonderful smell. And it just goes to show you that an experience of place touches every sense. And Kistler has a wonderful history. Originally, the building in the rear was a roadhouse. This barn was reimagined by Naomi and her team, and the interior, which you can see on the lower third from the left, the one of the most fascinating parts about this was the fact that in reimagining what this barn would be, they took all of the exterior barn board, put it on the interior, and that's where that amazing smell plus the fermenting grapes, of course, comes from. And then I love Naomi's quote here that when they decided what to put on the exterior, what would a farmer do? She says, well, they'd go to Home Depot and buy some boards. And so that's what they did. And so the brand new boards are on the outside of the building, original roof, reclaimed barn board on the interior, and then those amazing, iconic red doors that Naomi fought so hard to keep in the program. And they are now pretty much the calling card. The last project is Joseph Phelps, and this is just reached historic status this year because it reaches its 50th year. Was originally designed by John Marsh Davis, and it was really an ode to wood. And Joe Phelps was a contractor, built this original barn. This was a production barn, and like so many of these projects, it was then adapted by Hans Baldauf and his team to be an amazing hospitality space where they mimicked and preserved the wood on the left, adapted it again or interpreted it on the inside through the interior trellis work. And they were able to do that because the production had been moved down the hill to a new contemporary building, allowing this building to be a showpiece as it should be. And actually, Hans Baldauf just came out with a book about John Marsh Davis this year, which I can't wait to buy. And I'm done. That is it. I'm sorry I went a little long. And I'll hand it back. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Heather. I think my colleague Lisa will be kicking it off with the first question. Naomi, if you're still there, feel free to turn your video and microphone on. So
of course I'm
great.
still here.
She's off having coffee.
Yeah. No, that was great, Heather.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I am just dropping a link to purchase Heather's book from her publisher into the chat right now.
Oh,
my first question actually is for Naomi. Actually, I take that back. I will start with a question from Christine, who just popped it into the Q&A. Thank you. Christine asks, are there a few of these wineries listed on the National Register or State Register of Historic Places?
I'm sorry, which one is that?
I believe that, well, it could be for both of you to the projects that you both spoke to. But probably more recently for you, Heather, if any of the projects that you shared with us today are on either of those registers, or sorry, she clarifies, any of the ones you spoke about.
I think I don't actually. Joseph Phelps, they will apply, but they're not yet. They're just reaching that status right now with this 50th anniversary. I don't believe the others are. But I'm sure that Naomi's examples were. Naomi?
Yeah, the Krug, Behringer,
Greystone, right?
and Buena Vista, those are all on the National Register.
Fantastic. Naomi, my question for you, when you're looking at these wineries that have such a long lineage of history, how do you how do you choose what is both architecturally significant and significant to the heritage of that property when you're kind of thinking about what to preserve, what to try to save, especially if you're weighing, being able to save beams versus a wall versus different elements of the structure?
Well, I think I kind of started off about how these were all a building type and had so many similarities. But I think when you get into the history of each property, each story is so unique. So, Buena Vista was the first ever stone cellar building constructed. I think that's maybe why, we spent a little bit more time trying to save at least those caves. Those were, sole remaining that I know of that are in their original stone state. So each, we start out with the history of the site and the history of the people that were involved in the site. And that kind of takes us into that journey. Krug was a tax credit project, and the reviewers kept telling me that we're letting you do some things here that we wouldn't normally approve because it's a multi-generational facility now. So to them, it was very important that, the same family had been involved in this property since the 1940s and needed to make some of these changes so that they could maintain, their family business, let's say. So I think that's a long answer to your question is it really starts foundationally with the history of the property and the people, and then the people who are involved now. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Naomi. We have another question in our chat. I think this is probably largely for Heather, but Naomi, you're welcome to chime in. The question is, do you see an end to the back-end era at all? Are we past it, or are people still coppering the style for wineries / homes, etc.?
Is that, I guess that's for me. No, I really don't. I see it more as an evolution, because Howard Backen is the leader of a whole firm with really dynamic younger architects, younger partners, some of whom have spun off to do that. Many who have spun off to do their own thing with his blessing. I think it's more of an evolution, so to speak. I think perhaps, I'm going to choose my words carefully here, perhaps the era of imitating Howard's approach might be past in terms of contemporary expressions, but that reference to agricultural precedent hasn't gone away. It's just changed. It's different. One perfect example actually is Brand Napa Valley. It's not in my book because it was a little bit older than I gave myself a decade window to, within which I was looking. And but it is it's a very contemporary building, very tall, very different, but it is a reference to an agricultural vernacular, just in a different way. Milka Estates, same thing. Quintessa Pavilions, they're very lean, very spare, very contemporary, and yet there are these elements in the rusticity of the walls that open that reference an agricultural vernacular. So I hope that answers the question. I think it's not a yes or no answer. It's more of an evolution progression answer.
Well, Heather, I have a question as a
Sure.
follow-up. You mentioned that you weren't able to include a number of buildings. There might be another book. Are there Howard Backen projects in those that would
Yes.
in terms of the evolution? So it's still
Yes. And they don't
still relevant
but they don't look same. I'll leave it at that. Nope. His firm's evolving too, and it's not evolving away from something. I think it's evolving towards something, which is, I think, what any good architects would do. So
So
the answer to that is yes, there will be.
I also have a question for Heather. As many of us who work in the preservation field probably know, buildings are usually considered historic after 50 years. That's kind of the cutoff point. And a lot of the structures in your book are newer than 50 years. So my question for you is, if you had to pick one of the wineries that you highlight, which of them would you think would be most eligible to be historic?
Okay, that's so not a fair question.
Yeah.
It's like saying, which of your children do you like best? Um, well, we'll take Joseph Phelps for example. They turned 50 this year, and I would argue that is eligible. That should be eligible. I think Stryker Sonoma, which was designed in 2002 and holds a very significant place in a shift of the way that wineries were designed, would be eligible when the time comes. The rest, I'm not going to say anything. But those two, yeah, I think.
That's why we wait 50 years, because it's
Exactly
hard to evaluate which will have the
my
staying
argument.
power.
My argument would be, I think they all will be, but that's being, PR speak.
Well, and we need Naomi around to make sure that they keep
That's right.
renovating those buildings every 50 years so they stay standing.
I doubt they'll last as long, to be honest. Just the materials. Yeah.
Well, that is, that the goal of what is the most sustainable thing to do. It's to build something that will not need to be torn down, right? So my hope is that that's the approach. It's certainly the approach for most of the people I work with.
So we're coming up on closing time, but I also wanted to devote just a quick minute to here. I'll share my screen here because I wanted to let everybody know about our annual auction. This is your chance to get some amazing items at the end of the year and also support CPF's education and advocacy efforts throughout the year. So if you visit californiapreservation.org/bid, we would welcome your bid. It's really easy to do. All you have to do is put in your name and email address. Currently, I don't think there are any bidders for the Cade tour and tasting for four, which was one of the vintners that was highlighted by Heather here today. So check it out. And we also have a number of winery related items from across the Napa and Sonoma valleys, including looks like Trefethen, Naomi, which I think was one of your projects as well.
No, but it's a great wine.
Okay. Please do visit californiapreservation.org/bid, and we thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, we have a third part of this series, which will be occurring next Tuesday at 12 noon. So we hope to see you there. I wanted to thank Naomi and Heather for your time today. It's been such an enlightening experience, and we appreciate it. So happy holidays to everybody, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.